This time we're going to be taking a break from Skullgirls, as Umbrella gets prepared for her mobile release, and as I start trying to come up with funny shit for it. And we're making a trip to the JDM paradise known as Initial D. If it wasn't apparent enough, I enjoy the series a fair lot, from the characters, the races, and that god's gift called Eurobeat. It's not perfect by any means, and it's got some stupid plot decisions and deus ex machinas, but the overall series is a good watch. The question is, how would it fare by having video games made out of it? Plenty of licensed games during the 2000s were being pumped out, of varying qualities for sure, but often were made in genres that seemed a bit questionable because the base premise didn't really have an established core theme. Initial D being the opposite of this by having racing as its core theme, also fucked up on this aspect. But it's okay, the most successful games would actually make full use of the characteristics for a great racer. Enter the arcade stage titles. Originally developed by Sega Rosso, these games were moderately successful, enough to issue console ports for Arcade Stage 2, 3 and 4 in the form of Special Stage for the PS2, Street Stage for the PSP, and Extreme Stage for the PS Triple. There was also Mountain Vengeance, which was ported from Docs. Needless to say, the one game most people are familiar with, or at least serves as a starting point, is undoubtedly Street Stage. Definitely not because it's easy to hack a PSP. And wouldn't you know, that's how yours truly got largely introduced to the series. That being said, how does the game hold up overall? Well, the short answer is that it's pretty good, but boy, we've got some asterisks to discuss along the way. So the game starts off with an intro that loosely presents the characters and their respective vehicles, while the opening theme from 4th stage plays in the background. It's pretty basic and it's visually weaker compared to the one from Special Stage if you ask me, but it gets the job and it hits some key moments from the anime. Besides, it's just the intro movie, who gives a shit. With that we can start proper and we can dwell into the main obstacle that you bet your ass I purposefully avoided to mention until now.
これは日本の独占ゲームです。
Man, the Project Diva games were able to get English patches. Well, it doesn't matter anyway. Maybe it's different on another timeline. In case the language barrier gets in the way at first like it did for me, I do advise this video that basically makes a quick translation of the menus. Another problem is that I already have a file name called Brian, so we'll need something different. There we go. Right after putting the name of God, we're taken to a car select screen. A little odd at first, but you gotta keep in mind, due to being an arcade port, a lot of its traits have been essentially copy-pasted. In Arcade Stage, people would use these magnetic cards in order to later modify their vehicles and save progress like time attacks and so on, for repeated playthroughs. But you were basically stuck with that car. So what does that mean for Street Stage? Basically nothing. As soon as you have selected a car, you're free to just get another one. No costs or anything. Although you'll have to upgrade it from the start, because what you're selecting is not what your car will look like right away, rather eventually through visual and performance upgrades. Boy, I can't wait to get to that fucking rabbit hole. That being said, each car controls different, be it because of the drivetrain or gearbox. But the game doesn't explain very well how that ends up affecting its overall performance. It trusts that you know the difference between front-wheel drive and rear-wheel drive. But let's not lie to ourselves, you're gonna pick the 8.6 first, so that's what we're going with. But I'll paint it red because it looks sick. Once that's out of the way, we can start proper. We have the main campaign in Legend of the Streets, Time Attack, ad hoc multiplayer, the garage, and 2 separate collectible displays in either a card display or a mock-up for a Project D website. We're gonna focus on Legend of the Streets for now because that's where the meat of the game lies on, and you'll see basically everything it has to offer. You can pretty much start from anywhere save for 3 races, which require beating everyone else. But we'll start with Itsuki in the Miyogi Pass. First Blood! This also confirms that you're playing as a faceless self-insert, and not as any of the main characters. Car Select displays character portraits, but you're only selecting their same car, and not choosing to play as them. So even if you go with the 8.6, you're not playing as Takumi, which is good for the sake of being able to later race against him. The controls are about what you expect. Acceleration, brakes, steering and gear shifting, everything's there. Though it's the physics where the game becomes much more interesting. It's a shame that Miyogi is a horrible track to make showcase for it. It's incredibly basic with just one corner that doesn't even ask you to brake that much. It's such a brain-dead track and I'm glad it got scrapped for later entries, because it just doesn't come close to what the game will later on introduce. Moving on, another criticism would have to be the third-person camera. I can only assume it was done with the intention of highlighting the drifts.
Well, they fucked up.
It's very disorienting when it comes to taking corners, since it makes it hard to judge correctly how much you need to steer, and this only becomes more noticeable on the later tracks, so I find it advisable to always run with the front bumper camera instead. Hey look, it's the Cool Vibrations guy!
Cool Vibrations.
Too bad there's no Gumty deathmatch. Speak of the Red Devil, if you're thinking that Shingo tactics will work in this game, don't even bother. The AI has a fixed, unshakable path, which no matter how hard you bump against it, they won't budge away from it. So your only option is to properly outskill it. Anyway, Miyogi's done, and so is the most boring part of the game. Moving on to Uzi Pass, and we confront the guys from 7-Star Leaf at first. Remember them? It's okay, neither do I. Uzi is also an easy track, but at least starts to have corners where you actually need to make use of the game mechanics. See, the game plays a lot better while using manual transmission instead of automatic, since it allows you to take corners far more accurately, by quickly shifting down then shifting back up when the tachometer hits the right RPM. It may sound tricky at first if you're used to either games with no manual transmission or you always choose automatic, but once it clicks, it becomes incredibly satisfying to take corners. Too bad that Uzi only has about 3 corners to start practicing. It's a decent track and a much better introductory pass than Miyogi, but it's also on the safe and bland side. The race against Meiko and Sayuki is nothing special either, though it's cool that their car is labeled as a C-Lady like in the anime. Well, that's another pass down. Akagi's next, and this is where I'd say the game really begins, as the track's complexity is bigger compared to the previous 2. It also marks the end of circuit passes and switches to point A to point B passes, aka the best kinds of tracks. Akagi itself is still more on the easy side, but it's complex enough to pressure the player into getting deeper within the game's mechanics. The number of corners to take is vastly increased compared to Uzi and the Wet Fart, so a lot more finesse is required in case you don't want to bump into every wall. Another thing the game introduces is rain battles. Although through a normal run there's just 2 rivals that have them, you can rematch any rival and the second run will always be a rain battle. It goes without saying they're more difficult than with dry surface, due to the loss of traction, but it should be manageable enough. Worth mentioning, 4-wheel drive cars won't struggle as much under the rain. Then we get to Keisuke Takahashi, whose battle doesn't have anything particularly stand out, aside from the fact that potentially he can say the line. But I'll admit, during my first playthrough I got stuck against him for a while, so I guess he's somewhat of a skill check, to see whether you'll have a smooth sailing or you'll fuck up a lot. Anyway, that's another mountain pass down. On to Akine Pass, and we're welcomed by the CEO of Lonely Drivers. Considering we picked the 8.6 for this run, Akine becomes a breeze, but it can depend on vehicle if it struggles or not. At the same time, it's not a complex pass. What's interesting is the introduction of a mechanic as seen in the anime, the gutter run. Get right next to the gutter so the car is essentially guided by it and takes the corner as fast as possible, all while avoiding hitting a wall. It's very precise to get right, but it can lead to faster runs if done correctly. And this isn't the only instance of the game reference in the anime. We already got the Kansei Dorifto quote from earlier, but a much more meta reference is the battle against Ryosuke White Comet Takahashi. In the anime, his main strategy consists on remaining on the back, so he can analyze his rival's racing technique, and then use it against him to win the race. Here, it translates to massive rubber banding. But hey, the fact they tried to recreate that instead of making it just another generic race is really cool. Then we have the boy, Takumi, and frankly there's not much to his encounter. It's worth noticing he doesn't have the black hood from 4th stage of his 8.6, so it's likely it won't be the last time we see him. Other than that, there's not much to say about Akine itself. It's an easy enough pass and shouldn't be that much of a problem. And with the ghost of Akine beaten, we move on to one of the more unique tracks in the entirety of Initial D, Irohazaka. It's a very steep downhill composed of a series of hairpin corners, continually narrowing the further you descend. It's a slow track as a result, but it's very technical and you don't want to fuck up the hairpins too much. Say, we're already halfway through the game and we haven't upgraded our stock car. Let's actually change that, see if there's any upgrades on the garage. Bruh. Well, shit, I guess I didn't get any upgrades. Well, wanna know how you get them? There you go. It's total luck.
What in the goddamn?
This is no doubt the dumbest aspect of Street Stage. The fact that car enhancements are completely tied to RNG. That makes it so you have to replay races or time attacks multiple times in order to have an attempt at gaining one. And cars require 5 enhancements to be fully upgraded. That's just plain dog shit. And to add insult to injury, Arcade Stage 3 had a perfectly functional points system, which would grant you upgrades the more points you gather through races. If there's at least a positive to this, it's not required to upgrade your car to beat the game, but it's still really dumb. Also, visual upgrades work the same way, but at least those are just that, fancy visuals, not performance boosts. Leaving that aside, Discount Eminem's Emperor team isn't much to worry about. Kai Kogashiwa is. Again, it's a race that references the anime by having massive rubber banding. But instead of studying the rival from the back, he basically goes, dude, suspension lmao. I won't lie, I almost fucked up on the recording, I was paying too much attention to the rubber banding take place. Whatever, that's another pass down. Going into Hapogahara. I swear I must have butchered at least 7 of these Japanese names. Personally, I find this the hardest pass in the game and simultaneously one of the most entertaining, as it's both a mix of incredibly twisted and fast-paced. You'll need good reflexes on this one, as corners may seem like they come out of nowhere, and you'll be mostly balancing between 4th and 5th gear, depending on whether you can take the speed or need more accurate turning. And for some reason this track has no dayline setting. I don't know why that's the case, it just makes it a much more peculiar track because of it. Surprisingly, I've gone this far without making mention of the Eurobeat. Well, it's there. I don't know what to say about it other than it's what you'd expect. But in case you wonder, it doesn't have that trifecta of most known songs, which in retrospect it's a good thing, since it helps to expose lesser known ones. Moving on to Tomoyuki, his race is again nothing out of the ordinary. But it's pretty sick that if you choose to pass him with a blind attack, the end cutscene changes to a different one. Too bad I don't know what it says, or even if the blind attack does anything at all. I'm positive it's just for extra dialogue and that's it. The AI seems largely unfazed at whether I have the lights on or not.
Oh, transition! Transition!
Shomaru's next, and we go from my favorite pass to my least favorite. It's not overly difficult or anything, but it's slow and narrow to get through, and oftentimes feels like a slog racing here. However, compared to previous courses, its number of corners is nowhere near as large or difficult. Again, it boils down to the limited space you have to work with, and it certainly makes it a pain in the ass to overtake people, even a vehicle as small as the Cappuccino.
That's kind of small.
I was stuck on this battle for quite a while, since it mixes both the limited space to navigate and overtake with rain. But in reality, it's as easy as shifting properly right at the beginning to immediately take the lead, and then keeping up a good pace. Wataru is also a difficult bastard, thanks to his supercharged weapon and, say with me, a narrow track. Admittedly, I almost lose, but I was able to overtake him near the end. I don't really have much else to say about this track, let's just get the fuck out of here. Last track, Tsujizaka, one of the lesser seen passes due to the racers being nameless cheating douchebags. I'm not kidding, the game refers to them as men in Lanibo 5 and 6. That's just sad. Anyway, the track is actually not too complex. It has a couple hairpins to look out for, and the final section on the inbounds run is very tricky, so you'll have to get through it mostly on 4th gear. There's a couple of spots to watch out for, like the oil spill and the small under construction segment. They're the only instances of stage hazards, and they're once again references to the anime. Speaking of even more references to the anime, we just beat about every available opponent and can now face off against the aces of Project D, starting off with Keisuke. Now, given the events taking place during the Tsujizaka arc, he cannot use his own FD because of the oil spill, and has to borrow it from Pokeface Kyoko. Not that it makes a difference anyway, it's a challenging race where you can actually lead from start to finish, but he can overtake if you slip up, so be careful. Additionally, he's not the hardest opponent of Project D, that's Takumi.
Holy shit, that's fucking hot!
Watch this, cause I'm gonna kick his ass with a stockade 6 to prove he's so fucking weak. Well, shit. The most important part to take into consideration is the beginning, where you should go for an overtake, otherwise it's likely you won't be able to catch up. After that, it's all a matter of doing a run with minimal mistakes and the race is on the bag. Also, I wasn't able to record it, but if he's within overtaking range, he'll try to do a blind attack. But I doubt he'd remain that hidden because the player is just built different. And we've done it! Project D has been defeated and the game is over. Psych, just kidding, we still have the unquestionable best street racer left.
なんかタバコ吸いたくなった。
Bunta Fujiwara is not easy. Let me put it this way, you're gonna be stuck here for a long while. The battle takes place back at Akina, so it's at least familiar territory, not too complicated. But the thing is, the margin of error must be minimal. Any major mistakes can heavily jeopardize the run, as Bunta will immediately catch up and overtake, and you won't be able to catch back up to him. The main trick to this battle is as easy as taking the lead on the first hairpin, but it requires tight accuracy so you don't hit a wall and lose speed. Afterwards, it all relies on how well you can perform everywhere else. With that said, it's not a race that would require any car upgrades. All it really takes is some skill and patience, no luck involved. And once you beat Bunta, you beat the game for real. The Impreza is great because it was based on the manga. While the main campaign is over and we've effectively seen everything the game has to offer, there's still some post-game stuff worth checking out. Obviously there's time attacks, so you can improve your performance on any pass under preferred conditions like daylight or weather. Then there's a card collection, which includes general trivia about the manga as well as the featured cars, and goodies like extra songs and loading screens? Yeah, sure. There's also a website mockup menu meant to represent the Project D webpage, where you can listen to tracks, audio clips, take a look at a couple of artworks and consult time records. And then we get to the Bunta challenge. Oh goody. Here's how it works. You race off against Bunta across all the passes, and with each win he'll become much more difficult to defeat, up to level 15. Between levels he'll switch from the stock H6 for the new engine H6 and then the Impreza. It gets insanely difficult on the later levels, but at the same time it's also tedious needing to race him about 16 times to have all difficulty levels available. But yet again it's post-game. With all that, I can certainly say this was the initially street stage of all time. But is it at the end of the day any good? For the most part, yeah. It's pretty clear about its approach of gameplay in the form of an arcade racer. And on the later tracks it gets fairly challenging, but it remains fun throughout. At least if you're capable to adapt to its mechanics and physics. It's very likely not a game that appeals to everyone, even the average racing enthusiast. But it's a game that can really click if put the effort into it. I do wish they didn't take the card approach for upgrades. That's usually the worst aspect of the game, given it was done correctly on the arcade version. But it's also not something that hinders the overall experience. Anyway, I gotta go now. I have some Umbrella video to script or something like that. Absolutely. Come back in like a month.